The law matters. Games Workshop has had their head in the sand. Or have they? It certainly felt like it. Since their social media team made the fateful "there has always been female Custodes" tweet, they've been awfully stum on the subject, clearly because they knew that there was a backlash and they didn't want to give it oxygen. Because by commenting on it would reignite it and potentially cause them more headaches. But then they started going back true to form and advertising the release of the Custodes. Now, while this article wasn't specifically bringing up female Custodes again, I'm sure it was in the forefront of many people's minds, including mine. But the one thing that I took from this was that Games Workshop is back to business as usual. Back to plugging their minis, including the ones that might rub people the wrong way. And while there are a few comments alluding to the female Custodes, they've probably already banned a sizable number of people who would be vocal on the subject. And I'd actually go as far as to say that I'd be surprised if the number of people that have been banned by Games Workshop isn't in excess of the actual amount of comments that they have. Now, there are rumours going about, courtesy of Arch, that this was a compromise between Games Workshop and Amazon, as Amazon wanted female Space Marines specifically. Now, whether this is true or not, who knows? But regardless of this, Games Workshop's response, or lack of one, makes perfect sense. Do nothing, say nothing, wait for everything to blow over, and then get back to either the slow and progressive shafting of the law, or the tried and tested shafting of the customers. And it's usually not in that order either. Now, it feels weird having argued against their treatment of the law with the female Custodes, not to at least acknowledge that Games Workshop is a predatory and reprehensible company that for the most part takes advantage of its fans. So let's just take a moment to remember that only recently they deleted entire ranges of minis, in some instances effectively legending people's entire armies. Although we do have to remember that this is not the first time that they have screwed the player base. Personally, I still have flashbacks to my finding out that they were destroying fantasy to include something more akin to 40k in its place, and now I have to sit and watch them reintroduce fantasy and not lose my mind, which, trust me, is very difficult. Now that that's been said, between the shills on social media crowing about the female Custodes change, the people saying that change doesn't matter, or saying that the law doesn't matter, or just the misguided person who made a creator list labelling creators woke or not without realising quite how quickly that would be weaponised against him, or how quickly those woke creators would take that list and use it to drum up their own recognition, I was inspired to make another video. Largely because I am absolutely sick of people thinking that law does not matter, or that it's something that we can just do away with and sacrifice on the altar of representation. That the themes and the stories of universes should be altered so that they can inject identity politics or pander to certain demographics. And that we should just not care about these changes, because they have happened before and they will happen again, because the law only exists to sell miniatures. And then there's even those out there that say that law fans aren't real fans, as mental as that sounds. Now, I felt the need to address these points one at a time. With regards to representation and sacrificing law for the need of representation. The need of representation is a lie. 100% utter, undiluted hogwash. Does anyone seriously look at Warhammer 40k and think, No one here looks like me or represents me and my ideals, and I want that. Well, of course they do, but they shouldn't. It's a fictitious universe with a futuristic storyline, with an in-universe political system that is completely incompatible with anything modern day. Anyone with half a brain would realise that our world and the people who are in it are not represented in this universe. I'd go as far as to say that not a single person is represented within the 40k universe. And if you could say that we are, then every single one of us would effectively just be a random member of the Imperial Guard and just meat for the grinder. Yet, as fans, we love this universe, and we don't feel the need to be represented within the lore. Representation is little more than an excuse, and it's used to infect pre-existing IPs to force change to accommodate alternative views and politics. Specifically, the views and politics of those infecting the existing IP. And this is almost always done at the expense of what is already there. Now, my experience is, it doesn't matter how you look, who you are, what you identify as, no one who respects the hobby has been turned away from the hobby. The reality is that within the people who take part in the hobby, almost every differentiating characteristic is already represented within the people who love the hobby as it is. Now, relating this back to Female Custodes, there are female players who hate this change. And this change is clearly being done to inject more female representation for DEI purposes, be it for Amazon or for Games Workshop. Because let's face it, Games Workshop is a woke company. It's not because it's actually required, or even because it's desired by the majority of 40k players, because it's not. These female players who do not like the way the lore has been gutted are clearly fans. Because one of the key notions of being a fan is to enjoy or love the universe for what it is, rather than what it could be, or what they could make it be. A true fan does not need to change the story, the lore, or require representation within the universe, because they love the universe for what it is. If you don't, if you want to change it, guess what? You're not a fan. After all, fan is an abbreviation of fanatic. People who want to change an IP are not even casual fans, because that in itself is literally an oxymoron. At best, you're a tourist. At worst, you're only here to subvert, sanitize, and appropriate the universe for you, and people who think like you. Now for the people who say that change doesn't matter, or the lore doesn't matter. They, like Games Workshop, just have their head in the sand. Yes, Games Workshop changes things. Yes, some of the changes suck, and are clearly done specifically to sell more miniatures. For instance, Primaris Marines. Usually, however, there is expansion to the lore to explain such a thing, and it serves to explain something or move the story forward. While there have been changes before, or authors of books who have written certain novels, which have produced more than just a slight whiff of woke, the Female Custodes change is the first instance that cannot be viewed in any other way than having been done specifically for DEI reasoning. There's no expansion, there's no miniatures, there is no reason other than needless representation. And in response to any logical argument, people will scream that Games Workshop has changed so much since its inception, and you're absolutely right. They have. But for probably the last 15 to 16 years, we have had rapid expansion to the lore and the universe where the canon is not just contained within codexes, rulebooks, rogue traders, or white dwarfs anymore. The 40k universe is so much larger than it was, and retrospective changes now affect so much more than it used to. The universe now has a life of its own. It's no longer just fluff to justify the sale of miniatures, and it hasn't been for a very, very long time. When between the Horus Heresy and the 40k novels that are currently in existence, you could realistically drop $2,000 and still not own every single book, you can't say the lore doesn't matter. And for those who still believe that such changes don't matter and the lore doesn't matter, where do these changes stop? As we've seen with every other established IP, once this rot starts, it spreads. Every change that goes unanswered begets more change. Because the goalposts move. It's incrementalization. Take a little bit, take a little bit, take a little bit. You keep allowing them to do that, and eventually they will have taken a lot. You only have to look at White Dwarf's gate crushers to understand their goals. Because this is how DEI starts. Their idea is to open up the hobby to more types of people. Specifically, people that think exactly like them. Who clearly don't actually like the hobby, the theme, the universe, or the lore for what it is. And slowly but surely, they will force those things to change to accommodate them. As these changes ramp up, things start to become less and less like the universe that you and I know. And once the subversion is complete, and these things have been irreparably changed, so 40k looks like a grey, homogenized slop, these same agenda-driven people will then use their position to start to police thought and effectively gatekeep anyone that they deem as undesirable from whatever the hobby looks like at that point. People need to start caring about these changes, like Female Custodes, because they're not done for the health of the hobby, or the lore that supports it. Especially not with how they went about introducing it. They're done for political, ideological reasons. That's it. If you think that I'm wrong about this, that's absolutely fine. You are entitled to your opinion. But Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Marvel, the entire US comic book industry, Disney, Star Trek, and countless productions from Amazon, Netflix, as well as umpteen other things, surely offer enough evidence. Anyone who stands up and calls out these things, and how it is negatively impacting the IP, the lore, the universe, gets labelled as various forms of ists and told that they don't matter. Or worse, that they aren't even wanted, while the IP in question, once they've done their thing, is left in utter tatters. Now, possibly the worst take that I have heard regarding this whole situation is this.
Just an excuse to bash our toys together. Something that people who talk about the sanctity of the lore of Warhammer tend to forget, because they're casual fans, they're not real fans.
Now, I'm pretty sure that that is the definition of a hot take. Now, I could go on again and explain that to be a fan of something, you have to love it, not want it to change, and as fan is an abbreviation of fanatic, a casual fan literally makes no sense. But I'd just be repeating something I've already tried to explain in this video. The real issue here for me is the downright snobbery that is shown by someone who clearly mustn't care that much about the lore if she's trying to distinguish people who do care from people who don't in the way that she has. Now, she may be specifically talking about tabletop, but that isn't all 40k is anymore. Again, the argument of the lore being fluff for the tabletop might have been true a long time ago. But since 2004, there have been many games, and in excess of, I believe, 200 books, expanding on the universe and the lore which is contained within. Like it or not, 40k is tabletop, and 40k is the lore. The two are intrinsically linked, and what happens to one has the ability to affect the other. You could even make the case that the lore is actually more important, because changes to the lore specifically affect tabletop. Whereas if I change tabletop, it doesn't necessarily mean the lore will be affected. Now, if you're going to take up this form of fan snobbery, then I'd argue that if you don't think the lore matters, then you aren't, in fact, a fan of 40k. If you don't like the theme of the universe, like these guys, then guess what? You're not a fan of 40k either. If you remove the lore, the theme, the universe from the tabletop, what are you left with? If these things don't matter, why are you even bothering to play 40k? You could literally play any wargame. The lore is literally the thing that provides meaning, context, structure, and worth to the hobby. It's what allows people to invest themselves into the thing that they love. If after all this you still think that the lore doesn't matter, why don't you take the point of view that there's always been Orc Custodes? Why don't you go out there and play a doubles game with Grey Knights teaming with Demons versus Tau teaming with Drakari? And tell me that that doesn't feel intrinsically wrong. And the reason that should feel intrinsically wrong is because the universe and the lore dictate that those would never happen. Now, with the dust settling on this latest assault on the lore, there are those on Twitter that are claiming victory. Games Workshop sold out temporarily on the Adeptus Custodes sets, and of course that is being claimed by some as evidence of a victory and an overwhelming acceptance of the changes. Despite, of course, there not being any female miniatures, and of course it would have absolutely nothing to do with them being arguably one of the stronger armies on tabletop at the moment, let alone the latest release. So once again, I am asking every 40k fan who actually cares about the hobby, the lore, the theme, the universe, to reduce what they buy from Games Workshop, ideally to 0. The only way that we can make them listen to the player base is if their bottom line gets hit. If enough of us do this, then we might actually get somewhere, and at the very least be able to slow the change, if not completely stop it. And if we do fail here, I would urge everyone to go back to 7th or 8th edition and just pitch the tent there. But anyways, thanks for watching, and that's it for me, so that's it for you.